Dramatic twist finale of American Horror Stories Season 2. Episode 3. Drive exposes the actual identity of the nightclub serial murderer. The violent climax of American Horror Stories Season 2. Episode 3. Drive is full of surprises as the true culprit is exposed. While American Horror Stories have garnered less praise than American Horror Story, the spin-off can always be depended on to bring startling revelations at the conclusion of each episode. Like the horrific shock ending of American Horror Stories episode or the astonishing revelation showing multiple ties to Oz. Coven at the conclusion of Dollhouse. American Horror Stories Season 2's Drive delivers an unexpectedly cruel final act. The bulk of Drive in American Horror Stories made viewers believe Paul was the nightclub serial murderer. But it was revealed to be none other than the main character, Marcy. Her open marriage with Chaz subsequently revealed that they were a serial killing tag team, with her bringing the victims home and murdering them while he buried the remains in their wine cellar. The unexpected ending of American Horror Stories Season 2. Episode 3 clearly explained why Chaz was concerned about tales of a serial murderer, but it ultimately raised more concerns than it addressed. What happens at the end of American Horror Stories Season 2 Episode 3? He was actually attempting to warn her after paying attention to news accounts of nightclub disappearances. Paul began honking and flashing his lights at Marcy when he noticed a man's head continuing to show up in the rear seat. Bella Thorne's American Horror Stories Season 2 persona injects him with a sedative after confessing, revealing that she was the nightclub serial murderer all along. Then it switches to Paul, chained and gagged at Marcy's house, where she explains to him why she seeks revenge on clubbers and ends up chopping off his finger and abruptly killing him with a knife. In another last-minute twist, Marcy decides she wants Paul to start killing her guests as well, with American Horror Stories Season 2 episode closing as they collaborate to murder her closest friend, Piper. Throughout American Horror Stories Drive, Marcy conceals a strange purple mark on her neck and face with cosmetics. Marcy admits at the end of American Horror Stories Season 2, Episode 3, that she was mercilessly mocked for her grade throughout high school by jocks and popular males, so she exacts revenge by killing them. Marcy was born with a port wine-stained birthmark on her neck and face, which is produced by enlarged blood vessels that color the skin in a purple-red pattern. Marcy seemed to have discovered how to entirely conceal the birthmark with cosmetics in adulthood but was unable to do so in high school. Marcy's American Horror Stories motivate serial killer twist. After Marcy injects animal tranquilizers into the character of Oz, Death Valley cast member Nico Greetham, American Horror Stories flashes back to show what occurred the night he slammed into her car to rescue her. Marcy had intended to murder Wyatt when the two hooked up in her car, but the tranquilizer didn't work on him, and his head kept popping up in the car, alerting Paul. While it appeared like Piper and Chaz were concerned that Marcy would be the serial killer's next victim, the concluding shock of American Horror Stories Season 2, Episode 3 suggests that Chaz was simply concerned that she would be arrested for her crimes. The Drive twist in American Horror Stories reveals that Marcy became a killer to exact revenge on the arrogant males who bullied her in high school. American Horror Stories. Piper, a Season 2 character on American Horror Stories, notices this as her purpose, but thinks she's just hooking up with random clubbers, not taking them home to murder. It's unclear why Chaz was okay with Marcy murdering all of these random guys, whom he eventually had to bury in their wine cellar. But he appears to have known she had a murderous streak at the start of their marriage. Now that Marcy and Chaz will be working together to kill clubbers across town, it appears that they will be for their crimes. Marcy has killed how many people? Marcy's death count was already incredibly high before American Horror Stories Season 2, Episode 3. Since Chaz states that their wine cellar graveyard is filling up, the Ryan Murphy TV program presents Marcy as murdering 3 people. However, there are several missing persons posters and newspaper clippings that raise the number to considerably higher figures. According to the board in Paul's room, Marcy killed at least 10 more people before the American Horror Stories Season 2 episode. Therefore, a very conservative estimate of her death count is 13. Why did Marcy decide to murder Paul and Piper at the end of Drive? Marcy needed to murder Paul because he knew too much about her killing Wyatt. And the fact that he had been following the nightclub serial killer case made him dangerous to her. Marcy eventually says in the Season 2 finale of American Horror Stories that she has to murder him because he appears to be the same sort of person who tortured her in high school. Marcy resolved to kill Piper, her closest friend, because she had insulted her at the nightclub and had decided to cease being friends with her. It didn't help that Piper had pointed out her fears from high school as the source of her conduct, which turned out to be the underlying reason Marcy was killing nightclub patrons. Because Piper's concern for her safety had also stymied Marcy's ability to acquire new victims. American Horror Stories Season 2, Episode 3 serial murderer finished Drive with her closest friend as her next guest. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to comment, subscribe and give us a like.